Could it be that Aboleths are older than the gods? That before the divine ones came to be, such horrors shaped the multiverse? Now there's a chilling thought. Hey everyone, welcome to BTD. My name's Mark. Today we're talking about Aboleths. I feel like Aboleths are underutilized creatures, but at the same time, I struggle to figure out how to work them into my games. And I think part of that struggle is that Aboleths are essentially underwater or watery creatures. And so if your players don't find themselves around, say, underground lakes too terribly often, it might be hard to believably insert one into your campaign. So I think the only real place where I've seen them on like encounter tables and in adventures and things like that is when players are in the Underdark and the watery elements of that cavernous area. So I think we need to start thinking a little bit more broadly about where Aboleths can exist. And the monster manual gives us a lot to work on, and I think a lot of that sometimes isn't incorporated into games as often as it could be, given how much interesting stuff you can have going on with an Aboleth creature. So any lake, any deep lake, even an ocean, you can find Aboleths in. We don't necessarily think of them as being ocean-dwelling creatures, but they absolutely can be. And of course, possibly the most interesting feature of the Aboleth, these weird, horrific creatures, is the fact that they are somewhat eternal. So when they die, they are reborn on the elemental plane of water, and you can't really kill an Aboleth permanently. And they have perfect memories stretching back eons, by some accounts even before the gods existed. So you have these impossibly old creatures with perfect memories who have untold amounts of knowledge stored within them, and they're in these lakes, and God knows what sort of machinations they have going on. That's where you come in as a DM to use this in your game and figure out what these machinations are. So Aboleths are evil creatures. It says in the Monsters Manual that they are lawful evil, but perhaps more so than any other creature in the Monster Manual, they know how to play the long game. So they're not necessarily going to do the overtly evil thing in each situation, which I think gives them a little bit more nuance than many other creatures that you find in similar locations. But I think with the majority of your Aboleths, because they're so old, because they have so much knowledge, and because they don't really have to fear death, they're not necessarily going to give the players any mind. They're not going to necessarily worry about what adventurers are doing. They don't have to worry about it. And they can be doing their own thing, and if what the players are doing serves their ends, that's great. And if it doesn't, well, then they get in the way. And if the Aboleth dies, it's only temporary. So it doesn't have a lot of the same concerns that other monsters do. So playing them can be a little bit of a challenge, but I think it's a unique opportunity because you aren't having to play them in the same way. You don't have to play them as having a fear of death. You don't have to play them as wanting to get things done right away. They can play the long game within the world. And if something doesn't go their way, they can shrug it off because they have eternity to correct those wrongs. I think I would also lean into their backstory as being enemies of the gods and predating the gods, and according to some stories they were thrown out from the gods' realm, and so they have this ancient grudge and they remember it perfectly. So any character who is aligned with pretty much any god, good or evil, it doesn't matter where they are on the morality spectrum, I'm pretty sure that if you find a cleric or a paladin or anything along these lines, Aboleths are inherently going to hate them. They're not going to want to work with them because anything that they do to aid the cleric or paladin is aiding that god, the direct enemy of the Aboleths. So if you have these characters in your party, I think it's a nice story hook then to have an Aboleth find out about the party and perhaps form a grudge against the godly player in the group. The other element to their eternal nature that I find very interesting is that what they're trying to accomplish at any given moment might not make much sense. It might not be something that's a grand scheme to take over the world or, claim domination over a region or anything like that. It might be random. It might be arbitrary. They might be using thralls to do things that don't quite make sense to the players and only make sense to the Aboleth on a time scale that we can't even fathom. So I think an interesting thing that you can do to give the players a sense of just how different this creature is from the rest of the world around it is if it has any minions, and chances are an Aboleth has some slaves or minions or people doing its bidding of some sort because it is a powerful telepathic creature, that they might be doing things that seem very arbitrary, seem very random, seem almost insane. And this is something that you can impart to the players where they might not be able to make sense of it, and that will give them the sense of just how different this creature is, of just how strange it is, and just how differently its mind works from their own. So who are the minions of the Aboleth? Well, that could be swamp dwellers, it could be other sea creatures, because there isn't too much in lakes and oceans and other bodies of water that are going to be the equal of the Aboleth. So it can bring them into its thrall in a number of ways over time. Then there's also hybrid humanoids, like Kuatoa, for example, make good minions or slaves of the Aboleths. And because they're able to mentally dominate their opponents, I think that there's a wide range of creatures that could be working for an Aboleth. And even if you're in a setting that isn't directly in a body of water, you might have someone who's under the mind control of an Aboleth doing their bidding in, say, a city. I think this would be a very different place for an Aboleth to show up. The Aboleth itself might not show up, but its presence certainly could. So it may have multiple agents in a city doing its bidding, and it's very hard to trace it back to the Aboleth because it's so far removed from its natural habitat. But it may be having them do things that aid the Aboleth's plans, whatever they may be, and that may be a mystery for the players to get involved with to eventually figure out who is the boss pulling the strings behind the curtain here. And having it be an Aboleth, especially in a setting as different as that, so in the mountains or in the forest or in a city or town, I think that this could be a really cool twist on the trope of, the master villain pulling the strings behind the scenes. And then once the players do face the Aboleth, find the Aboleth and encounter it in some way, I would think that almost any Aboleth would want to fight dirty, because they have a lot of tricks available to them that don't involve just attacking until somebody falls. So maybe they use their telepathic advantages to learn the desires and fears of the players, and then they swim off. This could be a terrifying way to have a first encounter with an Aboleth because it's simply gaining information. So maybe the first 2 or 3 times they encounter it, it just swims in, learns what it can telepathically, and then swims back out to start to plot against the players. Does it try to mentally dominate one of the players and take it under its command? That's another way that there's a visceral horror to this, because that's the last thing players want. I know players who would rather just have their character be killed before becoming mind controlled by a being like this. And then, of course, wherever it's located, it has certain abilities, whether it's directly in its lair, there are lair actions, and regional effects. So it might be the lake that it's in, it might be the area of ocean that it calls home. So as soon as the players are within this region, I think you need to do something to make that obvious. Is there slime everywhere? Do they notice a stench coming from the water and realize that it's been fouled? How is it that you're describing the area so that they know they're now sort of in the area that's under the ownership of the Aboleth? There's a lot of cool things that you can do there to create that sense of visceral horror to go along with the other abilities that it has. I think that the biggest disservice to an Aboleth would be simply to have it attack the players until somebody dies. That's the absolute last way that I would use this creature. I might only have it do that once the players are inside its lair. Outside of that, because it's playing the long game, because it has so many abilities available to it outside just its basic attacks, I probably wouldn't have it engage the players at all in almost any situation unless it was directly against something that the Aboleth was trying to do. Otherwise, this is a creature that needs to utilize all its abilities to really feel like it is a top-level enemy. But this is why I really love the Aboleth, and I've been able to use it in very minor ways, and I really want to use it in major ways in campaigns and stories, because I think there's so much potential here. Because I think when you're using the telepathy and the slime and the disease and the regional effects and the layer actions and the fact that it doesn't need to worry about death and the ways that it can pull information from the players, all these things that we talked about, if you're utilizing them all together, it's going to create a very memorable, very scary villain for your players. And it's really going to make your players think, do we want to engage this creature? And if so, how do we go about doing that? Because within its realm, which it's not going to leave, it has every advantage. And if there are other interesting ways that you've used Aboleths, I would love to hear about it. This really is one of my favorite monsters in the entire monster manual, and I always enjoy hearing other DMs talk about how they've been able to utilize it at the table. So let me know down in the comments. If you like my content, don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, take care.